Also, just a note of warning. For today, I've systematically kind of tried to check the translations in here against what I was looking up in the dictionary, and quite a lot of it is either simply a New High German false friend for the medieval word, or pure guesswork, and not always well-informed guesswork. Just a warning that also things I'm going to give you as potential translations are quite often not definite answers, because we know about this word so little. And if you look up some of the words in the Grimmsche Wörterbuch, you'll find there is only one text that is given as a beleg for it, and that's actually the Easterplays. So we have here a lot of in-jokes that aren't, and we aren't any longer in the in-group. We can't really figure out what it is. So we are all doing informed guesswork. We can just try to justify how we are coming to our conclusions. So take everything I say with a pinch of salt, and definitely take the New High German translation of the Easterplays as a reading help, not as a definite translation. But also there's, as you will have discovered when doing your essays, much fewer scholarship on the place than there is on Parzival. So while in Parzival every word will have been turned around for 3, 4, 5, a dozen times, in the cases of the Grail vocab in 100-fold times, words like Pusterbalk will only have been discussed by a couple of obscure publications, if at all. So there is still something to do, which is good. I'll work your time. Yeah. So welcome to the third session in the Easterplays. What I've brought you as a screenshot today is not from an Easterplay, but from a Fastnachtspiel. So by far the largest group of dramas from the Middle Ages are Shrovetide plays, and they come en masse at the same time as Meistersinger, as Mähren, and they share a lot of these features. So it's a civic landscape and stock figures that come from the social class of the likes of the Meistersinger. So you have professionals, or not very professional professionals, such as the quack, the doctor who doesn't really know what he is doing, but compensates by pretending to know much more. And you have figures like the pharmacy apprentice, or all classes of servants. And we're encountering today kind of a whole hierarchy of upper servant, lower servant, apprentices. So, and if any of you have watched any of the Commedia dell'arte performances, you'll encounter again the same stock figures of the doctor, of the servants that are prone to fighting, are incredibly ugly. So you have inversions of things like Schönheitsbeschreibung in a from top to toe ugliness description. So you're with a Fastnachtspiele being performed at a Shrovetide, you have this upside down world. And with a merchant's play that we are approaching today, in a way, Shrovetide enters and interlocks with Easter. So you have the upside down world coming into the world of Bible, liturgy, and sacred play. And the Innsbruck Easterplay pivots these scenes around the figure of Mary Magdalene. You see her here as a figure from a tomb installation where she is shown with this container of ointment. Welcome to Easterplays. So she has the ointments, and this is the tiny biblical splinter of information on which all of the merrymaking and the merchant's play hinges. Because she has to have bought it somewhere, so the figure of the merchant comes in. And it comes in fairly early already in the Latin plays. So if any of you ever listened to the Carmina Burana in Karl Orff's version, he picks up the one vernacular song of Mary Magdalene from the Easterplay, which is contained also in the Carmina Burana. Kramer gibt die Farbe mir, die min Wengel rötet, damit ich den jungen Mann dir Dank der Liebe töte. Then Mary Magdalene is shown still in her worldly life because her figure is merged and identified with a nameless woman who is called the Great Sinner, who washes Christ's feet with a costly oil. So a whole prehistory, like Amazon tracking your buying records. So it's assumed she has bought, before she was buying the ointment for Christ, she was buying the costly oil for oiling his feet. And if she was a sinner, she probably has bought perfume before that. So you have her reconstructed prehistory entering in, and she has changed, but the merchant is still the dodgy character selling via the darknet Viagra type of stuff. And a lot of the puns come from this intersection of good things to sell and bad, dodgy things to sell. Mary Magdalene in the play itself is never compromised. So she stays in this, in the tragic role while the merchant takes over the comic overtones. In terms of staging, you have the description for all the figures. So the three Marys come along the front stage from the off to the merchant's house, and from the merchant's house, and which you have to imagine as a part of the backdrop of the whole stage set, one after the other figure interact with the three Marys and then recede to their respective house, and then the Marys move on, and especially Mary Magdalene, to the tomb, which has its own part of the stage. So you have a sequence of houses. We had Pilate's house at the beginning, and now moving along the stage, and then we had the tomb, and moving along the stage we'll have the merchant's house. And so we've ended with a Satan leading all the souls, clearing the stage with him in a rope, all the souls he has caught from the audience. So the three Marys will come to that later when we are looking at the visitation of the tomb. There are different reports in the Gospels how many women there were visiting the tomb. The Innsbruck Easterplays goes for the figure of the three because it allows for most of the dramatic potential to have this tripling of things. And we have seen how effectively the play uses repetition both as a rhetorical device but also as a didactic device to ram the message home by repeating it. And so you have here an antiphon talking about the loss, the death of Christ, which had... haven't we found out anything, Konstantin, about it? No, yeah, good. Which had several verses, so each of the Marys is singing one of the verse, always ending with a hoi quantus est noster dolor, which would thus become a catchphrase which the audience would recognize even if they don't understand it. But it would have expressed this kind of lament. And the stage direction here, subjungit rhythmum for rhythmum or rhythm, so as word for a verse text, so tells actually that this is meant to be understood as a continuation, as we had looked at last week, that much of the German text picks up on the Latin, starts with translating it and then expanding it. So you have the omnipotens pater altissime picked up in allmächtig, also omnis, all, potens, like the potential Macht. So allmächtiger is a literal, it's actually a loan translation into German for God. Pater, Vater, altissime, the superlative of altus, high, so the highest, again a literal translation, höchster, and then Trost comes in to fill the line and have a rhyme word for erlöst. The way it is done, if you compare the German with the Latin here translation, this is much more descriptive, while this is emotionally charged early on. Wenn du mich von Sünden hast erlöst, since you have released me from sin. So it's not just a lament, but a personalized lament. And that is quite often the case in picking up the Latin in German. And the OV Jammer picks up hoi and dolor. Hoi as in Middle High German sometimes also ahi or alas in English, an expression of onomatopoetic expression of grief. And this AW is picked up then by the second Mary. AW Jammer und Not, mein Schöpfer ist tot. And again, it's not a description who is dead, but so it's Christ, but it's my creator is dead. So between the Jesum Christum, so which is in the third line, this personalization is put in. And it's mine klagen, and while this is in the first person plural, noster dolor, our grief, each of the Marys articulates it as her personal grief. And what also is, she turns it into an address to the audience. Hierum, ihr Frauen und ihr Mann. So you have an address to the audience like the one you had at the beginning with the expositor Ludi. Again, this kind of formula that encompasses the whole world. And it becomes from an antiphon, it becomes a sermon that sums up why Christ is such a loss. And the third one, the Hoi Quantus est Noster Dolor isn't written in, but probably was then also sung as we had with the other Latin texts that aren't completely written out. And the third Mary then asks the other two to show their appreciation of Christ in death. So you would have them at the front of the stage, having just interacted with the audience, asking them to join in their grief, and then you come from the back, the merchant as a status figure with his wife and a maidservant to show that he is somebody important, starting with a high register formula, Gott grüß euch, ihr Herren überall, but then immediately turns it round into a joke, als sprach der Wolf und guckte in den Gänsestall. So that's another popular stock figure, normally applied to preachers who are, because there is the fable of a wolf preaching to the geese and using that opportunity to eat them. So it's not very promising if somebody who sells medicine stylizes himself as this wolf with the geese. And he's looking for a servant. This is one of the few medieval merchants' houses surviving in England, because they would be mainly built with a wooden frame, what in German is called Fachwerk. And you would have an open area, but with a roof over it on the ground floor, so you could store your goods at the back, sell at the front, and live above the store. And you, in the attic, you had another big storage area where you could pull up goods through the big window. So at least in medieval Germany, they would have a pulley here to lift up goods. If you ever come to Lüneburg or also Hamburg in the Speicherstadt, you can still see how it's done. Here it's just used to have a house sign up there showing here it's where you can buy things in barrels. And pretty much everything was sold in barrels. We just discussed it with the early modernists that you would also transport books, for example, in barrels, unbound, obviously rolled up as paper rolls. Because they're sturdy, you can roll them, you can transport them. And the figure of the servant who then comes is the stock figure of the unfaithful servant. If you ever watched Goldoni, Diener zweier Herren, which was quite a success a few years ago in London as, I forgot the title they gave it, Master to Servants. Servant to two masters. So where one servant does a double job but doesn't tell the one master that he's also serving another master. And I brought this woodcut of the comic figure of Morolf or Markolf. There are several versions of this, who is coming to serve Salomon, König Salomon, and outwitters Solomon, because he has the kind of practical puns, while Solomon is confined to his superior wisdom. And he is shown with Kulprichthaar. That's something that's described. So the merchant doesn't want him because he hasn't a hair at the front, but he says, I have at the back this kind of Haarschopf. I'm not quite sure how to translate it in English. So a kind of bushel of hair at the back. And that, if you see somebody like that portrayed in medieval illustrations, also in illuminated manuscripts, with hair going to all sides and standing up, it's normally a sign they are baddies. So unkempt in a literal way, as you also sometimes use it for somebody who is not really courtly. And he also then the merchant interlocks with a figure of the doctor, partly because selling the ointments and things like perfume would also quite often be rolled in one roll with the pharmacist with a doctor. If we have time at the end, we might watch a little bit of that. I've just given you the prologue of one of this play we performed in 1999 in Tübingen in the Brechtbau, and just at the lunch break, and just to see whether this was still understandable to a contemporary audience. So we did it as a real Fastnacht play on Rosenmontag in. And if you just look up the edition by Adelbert von Keller, Fastnachtsspiele aus dem 15. Jahrhundert, you'll get a host of these Alstspiele, and they are as dodgy as Dr. Play would be in English. And you also have always the figure of the really slick, or not slick is probably the wrong word, but just disgusting, slimy servant who is kind of Zuhälter for the merchant. Here in this play by Hans Volz von ein Spiel von einem Arzt und einem kranken Bauer, he is Quenzepelch. So you have these not really clear but funny sounding names for the servant. If you think probably the English plays Midsummer Night's Dream would be the closest to this intersection also between the comic and the high style, and there you have all the names for the followers of Titania. I'm not quite sure how they're called in English since I've mostly seen it in German, but they all have these multi-element names. Besides, Puck has just this stock name that has been around for longer, but the others are called like flowers.
They like cobwebs.
Yeah, cobweb is one of them. Yeah, so Quenzepelch is Pelz is hair, not only what? Fur, yeah. But, so it can be used also in a obscene sense. So Quenzepelch is somebody who would squeeze the fur of women. And the element Balk, which is used for both Pusterbalg and then the third. So you have a sequence of comic figures. The merchant, who still has an intersection with a biblical narrative. Then Rubin, that's the name Robin, actually. So like you have in Robin Hood, or even more in ballads like Hey Robin, gentle Robin, tell me where are we, Lähnemann, the sort of bum bum bum. So it's the a stock figure like the Hans Wurst in German, and obviously internationally known. And then these two subservants, Pusterbalg and Lasterbalg, have Balk as the end, which is a word for a changeling. So a child that would be exchanged for the right child, an ugly figure that does evil things, and you have it linked with other elements like Laster, vices, or Puster is probably related to the pustula, so the kind of pus-filled illness, which you must imagine them in a kind of makeup that would exaggerate these ugly features, so wild hair, big warts on the face. You have what's buckel, kind of if you have a hunchback, yeah, and really overdone as pantomime figures. Good. So the Rubin does a kind of description of his, perhaps, of what he is doing as a servant, and ich bin ein getreuer Knecht, so getreu, faithful servant, which is a biblical figure, so the faithful, loyal servant would do exactly the bidding, but he is turning everything into an obscene description. So instead of being religious and going to the church, he will visit chapels with a lady, meaning going to her chamber. He will help her to pull flax, again obscene, and rub her mane. Let's see. What else we will have to know? Here, this description of things starts as if when he says he'll give him his money as soon as the grass is green, that's fine. The Stock erlaubt, so as soon as the staff becomes green, which is less likely. It's one of these miracles that was associated in the Bible with Aaron, who had a bear staff, and as a sign that he was the chosen one, it would turn green. And the same is in legends in the Middle Ages with Joseph, who's shown that he is the man destined to marry Mary because his staff turns green. But then the third one is completely impossible. Der Bock, so the he-goat, the ram, having young goats. And then he'll give him some clothes as reward. And this the clothes that somebody gets passed on, they get more threadbare and threadbare as the feed line goes down. At that point, when Rubin is going out, that would be the next point of audience interaction. So the audience had been just watching since they had been addressed by the Marys, and now suddenly he's drängen, so to part the crowds, to make way for the merchant who is now staged as this big doctor from afar. So Rubin addresses the crowd, and starts singing, and the promises he makes to make all the healthy truly sick is something that is picked up also in popular songs. So, whether any of you in your world have ever seen the Mundorgel, which is a small songbook which is used by the scouts of everybody. So the most popular folk songs, and there is a song about Dr. Eisenbart kuriere die Leute nach meiner Art. Ich mache, dass die Blinden gehen und dass die Lahmen wiedersehen. So that's the same kind of promise that he's able to make the lame see and the blind walk, which is not quite what is asked for. Anyway, this is another stock of phrasing to claim you have seen everything. So it's a list of countries to have visited. And for example, if you see Don Giovanni, there the figure of Leporello, the servant, has this aria where he sings about all the countries that Don Giovanni has visited and seduced women. Now Rubin is trying to hire a servant, and so he passes on his promise to pass on his used clothes, and so they become much more threadbare than the things that were promised by the merchant to him. Particularly funny is the Grindhütlein, Hotelin. Grind is the skin of your head, but normally associated with a kind of a skin illness, so a rash on your skin. So a little hat to cover the infected head. And again, you have to imagine it with lots of props that would celebrate that. It's interesting. I talked briefly about names and how they circulate in popular imagination. So, like, we only know that obviously this figure of Robin was known across Europe from these very occasional mentioning. Also that this figure of the Eckhart, I don't know whether any of you have read Goethe's Der getreue Eckhart, which was a figure that Goethe picked up from popular books. This must have been around much longer. I think we need to go to the read-through, so we'll you have to figure out the rest of the vocab as we go along. Konstantin, would you?
Yes. Tunc prima persona exit contando.
Omnipotens pater altissime, angelorum rector mittissime, quid faciamus nos miserime, hoi quantus est noster dolor.
Subium et requiem et vigil.
Allmächtiger Vater, höchster Trost, wenn du mich von Sünden hast erlöst, wo schall ich mich hinkehren, sind ich verloren habe minen Herren. Ah, weh, Jammer und Leid, das mein armes Herze treit, sind ich irre schall geh allhie, das lass dir Herre geklaget seh. Secunda persona exit cantando.
Amesimus in imsolatium, Jesum Christum Mariae Filium, ipse erat nostra redemptio, hoi quantus est noster dolor.
Et dicit.
Ave, Jammer und Not, mein lieber Schöpfer, der ist tot. Jesus Christus, Marienkind, darum meine Klagen so groß sind. Hier oben, ihr Frauen und ihr Mann, lasst euch das zu Herzen gern. Dass hat geleden den Tod, alles durch des Sünders Not. Tertia persona exit cantum.
Seteamus unguentum emere, cum bene possimus ungere, corpus domini sacratum, hoi quantus est noster dolo.
Dicit.
Viel lieben Schwestern beide, wir schollen uns gehaben zu unserem Leide, wenn wir unseren Herrn haben verloren, der uns zu Troste was geboren. Haben wir ihn lieb gehabt in dem Leben sien, das tun wir in seinem Tod schien.
Tobmercator exit, cum uxoret ancilla et dixit.
Gott grüß euch, ihr Herren, überall, als sprach der Wolf und guckte in den Gänsestall. Der mir könnte gewiesen einen Knecht, der mir zu Dienste wäre recht. Mein Text Suspension. Dem wollte ich solch Lohn geben, dass er das Jahr nicht könnt überleben. Rubin venet edicit.
Herr, wie ducket euch um mich?
Trüben Knecht, was weiß ich?
Ich bin ja ein getreuer Knecht, zu Frauendienste frug ich recht. Wollt ihr mir Sinn danken? Ich zieh mit euch gegen Franken. Mit eurer Frauen Kappel treten. Ich helfe ihr auf den Flachs jäten und dazu die Mähne reden. Als man tut den Jungen geben.
Ui.
Zu Franken habe ich viel gelogen, zu Beigern habe ich viel Lüte betrogen. Und in mir durch die Land, wir werden beide geschont.
Mich dunkt, du siehst ein wohlgezoggener Knecht. Zu meinem Dienste bist du mir recht. Du sollt mir sagen, allzuhand, wie die Name sie genannt.
Herr, ich bin Rubin genannt und werde euer Knecht allzuhand.
Sprichest du's gar an irgendwann? Es ist gar ein stolzer Name.
Herr, der Name ist nicht allein mein. Ihr wollt selber ein Schalk sein.
Nu sage an, lieber Rubin, wie gering ist das Lohndien?
Herr, 5 Schillinge, das ist mir Gedinge.
Wie mag gesehen den Lohn so groß? Nu bist du doch unter der Huben bloß.
Ich bin unter der Huben nirgends so kahl. Ich habe in dem Nacken Kulbrich da.
Rubin, nu beite vor was, so grünet das Gras und laubet der Stock und zickelt der Bock, so geb ich dir durch Lüftgen einen Rock, auch geb ich dir von Semde ein Buch und ein Hemde und min alten Hosen dazu. Du ziehst du an, Sport und Fruh.
Herr, griffet vorwärts und erlaubet mir das, dass ich die Zeit vertriebe mit eurem jungen Wiebe, des Orbenes bei dem Führe, sehr mir so skaptiere.
Von mir habe die Laube und tu das nicht vor meinen Augen.
Dank habt, Herr Meistermin, dass ihr selig musstet sein.
Robin, min viel lieber Knecht, nu tod ihn im Dinge recht. Anlaufen sollte sie gar schnell und sollt singen Lut und hell. Das Volk drängt voneinander, dass ich möge gewandern mit meiner schönen Frauen dorthin in die Aue. Dazu tu ein Gelese, bis dass ich komm auf das Gesäße. Nur heb Uf, Korb und Stab und gewinn den Lüten viel Halle ab.
Herr, das tu nicht ein Gigant mit meiner rostigen Hand. Du wiegt, ihr Herren allgemeine, beide groß und kleine, lasst min Meister gehen hervor, steht all über Hor, er ist der besten Meister ein, so wie ein Fliege gesaß in einem Bein.
Rubin, lieber Knecht min, lass dir die Rede befohlen sehen und sage minen Lahmen den Lüten. Nicht mehr will ich dir bedüten.
Das tu nicht, Herr, zur Hand, das ist dem Lütenwelt bekannt. Hier kommt Meister Hippokras, die Gratia Divina, sin Mutter ein Meister in Schläge fraß, in Art Mediziner. Er sprach, er werde einen Meister sehen, und was von Kunsten rieche, was man ihm der Gesunden bringe, die macht er alle siche. Und es lieget alle Grieche, beide Arm und Rieche, beide Frauen und Mann, die sich hier gesammelt haben. Uns ist kommen in die Land, ein Arzt wird bekannt. Er ist geheißen Hippokras, vorher sollt ihr wissen das. Er hat durchfahren manche Land, Holland, Proband, Rustenland, Zabani, Albany. Nach verwassen der Wursten und Romani. Ist er ein Meister über alle Erstige. Nicht mehr kann ich nicht sagen. Mein Meister ist ein kluger Mann. Wird einer in dem Mantel wund, kommt er zu ihm, er macht ihn gesund. Dennoch sage ich euch wohl mehre, von seiner heiligen Lehre. Die Blinden macht er sprechen, die Stummen macht er essen. Er kann zuerstiger als du viel, also ein Esel zu Seitenspiel.
Rubin, lass den Schallen sein und schlag mir uf den Kramin.
Ich mag es die Länge nicht betragen, ich muss auch einen Knecht haben.
Rubin, warte dir um einen Knecht, der dir zu Dienste füge recht.
Du hoch und allgemeine, beide groß und kleine, kann mir jemand gewiesen einen Knecht, der mir zu Diensten wäre recht? Ich spreche es uff, die treue Mien. Ich gebe ihm einen Heul in Gretotelin und eine alte Hose, dann kann ich nie gelose. An dem Knie ist die Dunne, an dem Fuß ist nirgend kein Kunde. Und eine alte Bruch, seinem Liebe, zu einem Schlaggertoch. Pusterbalg wenig et Igitt.
Das will ich von euch haben und will auch unter dem Kobe traben.
So schaue mich ein Knappe. Er kommt gesprungen als ein Trappe. Eier, was kann er schwatzen? Er hat eine Nase, also ein Katze. Er ist über die Schultern breit, sie eine Rucke manchen Hocker treit. Nur sage, hält Knebelin, wie ist geheißen der Name din?
Herr, ich heiße Pastuke und lehre unter dem Buche. Wenn der Härte zu Felde triebet, Wilch Maid dahinden bliebet, die werf ich nieder und erswinge er ihr Gefieder. Ich riebe er Klippen in den Bart. Ich heiße der Krumm Eckart, ach, war nicht gelogen, als ein Scheit. Ich heiße zwar Pusterbalg.
Nimm nur auf den Hals den Sack und laufe wir alle in diesen Tag, bis dass wir kommen zu jungen Wieben, mit denen wollen wir die Zeit vertreben. Dunk Pusterbalg rezebit cum Sacco. Mercator dicket.
Ruben, lass den Schallen sehen und schlag mir auf den Kramen.
Das tun ich, Herr, also Hand, mit meiner rostigen Hand.
Et circumspicice po servo et clamat alter Voce.
Weh, mir ist Leid und Zorn, ich han den Knecht Pusterbalg verloren, mit dem des Herren Salben, und ich furchte, er lege Kalben. Pusterbalg, bist du Bederbe, so kommt mir des Herres Salben wedere. Pusterbalg wenet et dicket.
Wanna, Meister Schlöte, wie könnt ihr klaffen so viel? Nehmet hin euren Korb und euren Sack. Ich will euch keinen Tag nimmer Gedehne mehre. Ihr werdet Geschandschere.
Wo lehren in den Rehen, ihr rechter Hennekin? Etzi Perkutionsee.
Slach,
Fach.
slach,
Fach.
slach, slach, slach.
Mercator dicket.
Lasst davon, ihr Schelke beide. Es kommt euch anders zu großem Leide.
Wälde nur jemand nehmen soll, beide Silber und Gold, und wählte an Pusterbalg des Staatsräte, dass er mir Hulfe, die Disteln und den Rosen jäten.
Dobritra,
Hortere, was höre ich da?
Dobritra.
Hortere, was höre ich da?
Ah ja, bist du's, Ruben, du viel lieber Gesellemin. Sage, wie machst du dich gehabe, du herzetruter Knabe?
Ja, wie ich geworden, eines Arztes Knecht.
Wehrlich, dazu flügest recht, wenn du kannst wohl stehlen.
Zwieg, das sollt du hehlen.
Ah ja, was gibt er dir zu Lohne?
Das will ich dir sagen, schon. Er hat mir groß Lohn benannt. Ich fürchte aber, es sie entant. Er spricht, woll ich zu Ritter werde, er wolle mir helfen mit seinem Pferde. Treuen, ich fürchte, es fuge mir nicht, es sei denn, dass sich der Bams mit dem Kaiser bericht. Lass der Balg, all Rest fuget mir wohl, dass ich zu Ritter werden soll.
Ab dir als mag widerfahren, wie schall ich denn gegen dir gepaaren?
Geselle, das will ich dir sagen. Du sollt mir ein Schwert noch tragen und sollt mir aufsetzen wie eine Rittershuben und sollt mir die Federn aus dem Haare klugen und sollt ihnen unverspart Antonia in meiner Frauenzeit. Das aber vertice ad mulierem et cantat.
Mein Herr hat mich ausgesandt zu einer schönen Frau, und sie ist schön über alle Land, sie spanst in jener Aue.
Lass dabei liegen.
Gott grüße dich, du tugendliches Wieb. Ach, schell dich tröten dienen lieb, wenn du bist so wohlgestalt, großer Schönheit, Mannigfalt, so müsst ich lange leben, darum will ich mir den Mantel geben. Antonia dizit.
Lass dabei, du machst wohl Zwiegen, oder es wird dich betrieben. Will du schon Frauenhold wesen? Du kannst nicht schon das Pulver lesen. Jo bist du krumm und hockerecht, du fugest bast zu einem Baderknecht. Was Liebe schuld ich zu dir han, du bist doch in den Ländern lahm.
Ah ja, wer hat euch gesagt von meinen Lenden? Dass ihn der Teufel müsse schinden. Nur wollte ich wenig, wüsst es alleine. Du wissen's alle Leute gemeine. Zwar, ich will auf dieser Fahrt lassen wachsen meinen Bart und will mich in ein Kloster geben. Darinne will ich verzehre mein Leben. Warum so bitte ich überstüre, Wurste, Flecke, Wampen zu dem Führe? Nur wicht, ihr Frau Lähnemann, niemand hindere mich daran.
Mercator liegt.
Ruben, liebe Ruben, schla mir auf den Kramin.
Ja, das tue ich, Herr, also Hand, dass wir den Luten werden bekannt. Alle Porter kurieren sie tags, Exitags, Thermax, min Friede, es ist nah bei dem Tage, ein Esel sollte ein Sack trage, ist nirgend keine mehr. Der erste Schal auch alliste, so ist das die andere, die brachte min Herre von Flander. So ist das die dritte, die brachte min Herre von Ägypten. Die vierte hat die Tugend, welche Frau hat die Jugend. Und hat einen alten Mann, der nicht wohl gebrüten kann, so hielt eben viel Schiere, ein Schlag oder Viere, viel nahen zu seinem Herzen, so Merzes ins Märzen. Der fünften hatte ich vergessen, die sechste hat mir der Tufel gefressen. so ist das ein Koren, welchen mit Ermeitung hat verloren. Und vor Schlunde Nüne alle Morgen helfe er Gott, sie mochten im ersten erworben.
Rubin, ich sehe dort viel Lüte.
Herr, da ist Jahrmarkt heute.
Rubin, lass den Klaffen sein und stoß mir die Wurzeln min.
Was ton ich, Herr, also haben mit mir was die Hand. Bitte.
You have to send.
Oh.
Rubin, stampfest du die Würze?
Nein, Herr, ich stampfe Eselsfürze.
So nehm aber die Hülsen und wirf sie unter die alten Wieb, dass sie lassen ihr pülsen.
Seht ihr alten Ziegen, damit sie euch genügen. Seht ihr alten Hellkrucken, ja, Tuffel hoch auf den Ruckel. Ja, seht ihr alle Bose und lasst nicht euer Gekose.
Rubin, lieber Rubin, was stempfest du zu derselben Min?
Herr, habe guten Mut, die Sache wird in der Masse gut. Da kam so das Getümmel von einer Brucken, das Malz von einer Mucken und das Blut von einem Schlegele, das Gehirn von einem Flegele und der großen Glockenklang, was der Kucketure Gesang. Und eines alten Monches Fist, hey, wie gut der zu salben ist. Wo seht ihr?
Ja?
Okay.
I'll put in more of the vocab. I marked all as red, which I thought would be good for looking up, but since many of the words aren't quite clear, I hadn't put all of them in. Just to show you, stoßen die Wurzel. So, what is Mörser und Stößel in English? Crucible? Yeah, mortar and pestle. And in English as in German, it's quite often used for obscene references. And that's explored in here. And so this is what Rubin is supposed to do. First to pulverize the ingredients and then set out the stall with all the different medical things. What a doctor is always shown holding is a glass with what's in the glass? Held up to the light. Urine. It's if you see a doctor in any image in the Middle Ages, it's always with a urine glass, which was the main diagnostic means. It's quite often made fun of in the plays as well. So he sees the urine is black, so you are dead. It's red, you are bleeding, whatever. What I also wanted to show you is obviously much later, but the sack that he's supposed to carry is probably more something like a keeper to carry all the stuff like a fliegender Händler would have done. So this is a sketch for Papageno, who is traveling around with his birds. So we'll continue with this intersection between the Marys and the Merchants play next week. And look particularly at how this intersection produces comic effects. And then we'll have just the very last section with a visitation of the tomb in week 5. So this is meant to read week 4, which is next week, and then week 5 we'll have the visitation of the tomb. All right, thanks.